call Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you to the Minister who's in the chair for answering some of the questions that have been put to him. It was useful to get some clarification on those points, Minister, so thank you. So I think that colleagues on both sides of the House that have spoken on this legislation have traversed very well why we're here and how we got here. And I want to address some of the issues in part two that the Minister just raised and pick up really where he finished off about what it is that we can learn from this legislation going forward in terms of what it means for the future. The Minister talked about two of the issues around eligibility, who's eligible, being covered off in this part two, and the need to validate the Gazette notice. The other point that he raised that I think is worth discussing, that is of interest, is the time frame around liability that part two deals with and had to deal with in this legislation, because Mr Chairman, as a Canterbury Member of Parliament sitting through the hearings on this Weathertight homes legislation, it did from time to time send a chill down my spine around a number of issues. First of all, around the time period for liability, which is covered in this, and the precedent that this legislation puts in place, which is around dealing with when it is that the certificate of compliance is issued in terms of when we start calculating liability. Because of course, in terms of EQC claims, that we are dealing with a 6-year window in terms of the liability that people have a right in order to take EQC to court. But one of the issues that we have in Canterbury with the home repair program, and the Minister talked about the need to build it once and build it right, that many of the repairs haven't had a code of compliance because there has been the ability for the building industry to self-certify. That we have laid aside in the name of speed the need for people to consent quite significant repairs to home. So in terms of the precedent that this legislation sets, in terms of when we start calculating liability in the absence of certification as we would normally recognise it within the building industry in New Zealand, I have great fears. And my great fear is that we're going to be back here in a decade's time, having to put into place legislation that is going to clean up a mess that we could have foreseen around how it is that people have redress around their homes. And the very ideas that we are talking about in this House tonight, the fact that for most New Zealanders, their house is going to be the largest asset that they will ever own. And the need to have security in that and to have some certainty around what is happening is paramount. And for so many Cantabrians, the lessons of what we have learned in terms of the leaky home saga are not something that have been picked up. So I would encourage the sentiments that the Minister and the Chair is expressing tonight around the need to get the regulation right, to build once and to build it right, or to repair once and repair it right. I would encourage that Minister to go and talk to some of his Cabinet colleagues and to warn them about the consequences that we could be facing. Because, Mr Chairman, the rhetoric, the many of the themes that we have going through this about determining eligibility, setting up funds. We are spending, and rightly so, spending so much time fixing Cantabrians' homes, not once in some instances, but twice, that the EQC is having to go in to do patch up on repairs that have been botched in the first place. Are we now going to, in a decade's time, are we going to be in this House talking about setting up a fund so that that work can be rectified yet again? And Mr Chairman, that is something that is truly disturbing to me, that we have the potential to deal with that now. Because, Mr Chairman, none of us as legislators like being in this House doing fix-up legislation. It's not something we enjoy. It certainly isn't something that we enjoy on this side of the House. We've got ideas for the future. We want to be talking about how it is that we can make New Zealand a better place and not fixing the mistakes of decades past. And we run the risk of doing that. We have ideas on this side of the House of how it is that we can not only get people into houses, but we can get people into the Kiwi dream, that we can set them up for a future, and that we won't spend our legislative timetable fixing mistakes that could have been foreseen in the past. So, Mr Chairman, I think there are some lessons that we need to learn from this piece of legislation, which Labor is supporting, and we are supporting it for the reasons that the Minister outlined. Mr Chairman?
Dr Megan Woods.
We are supporting it for the reasons that the Minister outlined, that it is sensible, it needs to be done for the people that have found themselves in this horrific situation of having their home, their piece of security, something that isn't as secure as they thought it was going to be. So we are in that situation, but for goodness sake, Mr Chairman, let us learn the lessons of this unfortunate phase in our history and think about what we're doing in this very House at the moment in regard to the potential leaky homes issue that is going to face this country in a decade's time. We know that it's coming. We know what the risks are, and we're talking about them tonight. So I urge you, Minister, to talk to some of your Cabinet colleagues. Thank you.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Chairman,